Hello and welcome to today's special webinar event on the secret to ransomware recovery, quality backup data. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's content, there are a few things that you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be a very educational event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we will discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources for download. They include a link for getting started with Rubrik, as well as links to Actual Tech Media, our Guerrilla Guide book club, and the Actual Tech Media Event Center. So I encourage you to download those handouts now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. If you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry the drawing has already occurred. If you are the winner, you can choose to donate the value of the gift card to one of our selected charities. Thanks to generous prize winners on previous Actual Tech Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to charity. So thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. To help encourage you to ask any pressing questions that you have, we're offering a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one worth $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's important content. So I'm excited now to bring on our expert presenters from Rubrik, Jaap Brasser, Senior Developer Advocate, and Jeff Inouye, Technical Marketing Architect. So Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. Hey everyone, Jeff Inouye here with Rubrik Tech Marketing. Today we're going to talk about backup security and how Rubrik is helping our customers ensure quality backups. We don't want our customers, or you for that matter, to pay the ransom. So let's dive in. I want to first start off by level setting on the anatomy of a ransomware attack. We're all very aware of how big the problem is, but it's important to break it down because we need to understand it so we can know what we're designing to defend against. We know that attackers are breaking in and traversing the network, but in the last 6 to 12 months, what they do next has definitely changed, as we've seen a rise in the cases of double extortion. So before they encrypt data, they're going to exfiltrate anything they have access to so they can guarantee a payday. Once they've exfiltrated data, the next thing they're coming for is the backup platform. And this is a really big shift because backup is traditionally thought of as insurance or nice to have for compliance reasons. Maybe we use it a couple times a year for an individual file or a database restore. But now the security and the integrity of that backup platform is the difference between you, as a business, having to immediately pay the ransom or having some options. When encryption is noticed in the environment, it's likely going to be the first sign you've been attacked. You get an IT help desk ticket, someone's seen some encrypted files or a ransom note, and that's just on one server or one share. It's likely just the tip of the iceberg. The real question is, how big is the iceberg under the water? This is especially true when you break down the anatomy of an attack and what you need to design for. But if we approach this with the zero trust mindset of never trust, always verify, we have to think about if an attacker gets into your environment today, how do we protect our backups? And specifically, maybe against any different attack vector that's out there. So this could be something simple as logging in as a backup admin. Is it just protected with a simple username and password? Or how do we stop a compromised backup admin account from deleting backups? You see, access control is only the first problem. The second problem is if endpoint protection fails, which potentially is our only method of knowing what's been encrypted, then how do we know what to recover and from what point in time? The last point is, even if we do recover, if the data is exfiltrated and the attacker says, hey, I'm going to release your data to the public, causing harm to the business, how do we even know what was at risk? So what I'm going to take you through today is how Rubrik can help with all three of these. And the third one, you might not have even thought possible from a data protection platform. So let's start with point number one. But first, I want to clarify a few principles of data protection because there's a lot of terms being thrown around in the market, and honestly, they mean a lot of different things. But for us, when we talk about air gapping your data, when I say no air gap, I mean your backups are online. They're physically connected to the network that they're protecting. They have mountable file systems with standard storage protocols. These storage protocols are meant to be browsable. They're meant for file sharing. So an attacker can simply connect to a backup data from a compromised server on the network and then have access to the backups. A logical air gap is a really interesting difference, especially for us, because data is physically connected for the fastest recovery speed, but it's not browsable or mountable in terms of the file system that holds the backups. So in Rubrik, there's no way you can browse on network to see the backup data, but it still gives you the fastest recovery. This is the best sweet spot for our customers because you get the speed of the local recoveries, but you also get the security of a physical air gap. And while we're at it, a physical air gap, the cleanest definition is tape. Once tape is removed from the system, it really can't be compromised by an attacker in the methods that we're talking about. But it also happens to be the slowest method of recovery, so it might actually be quicker and more cost-effective to just pay the ransom. What's more important here is that an air gap needs to be combined with immutability to protect your backups. And immutability is tossed around all over the place, but really what it means is that a backup can't be edited. This is really important, of course, because we don't want attackers to compromise backups just by encrypting the backup data itself. The one catch with immutable backups is that they can be expired. So you need to be able to combine the immutability attributes with something like a retention lock. And a retention lock, plus the additional protections, access controls, whatnot, they can ensure that an attacker cannot arbitrarily expire backups by logging in with a backup account. So what I'm going to take you through today is that Rubrik does this natively out of the box, and why we don't need a physical air gap, and why a majority of customers trust our logical air gap, native immutability, retention lock features, and additional access controls. So let's talk about why zero trust data management. If we look at traditional backup, it's backup software writing to some sort of disk-based dedupe target. There's no air gap out of the box. There's no immutability out of the box. The attacker simply takes a backup admin account that's compromised, probably just username and password, and logs into backup. They compromise AD or directory services, and potentially they just expire the backups. Alternatively, they'll potentially just go to the backup storage itself. It's online, it's accessible on the network, and they just delete it from there. The real problem is when an organization comes under a major attack. This now becomes an unrecoverable event. Now, a way around this is to potentially tier data to cloud and then apply subsequent locks. So this will certainly protect the data, but the recovery time could be measured in weeks because we have to download all of that data from backup copies. The real catch here is that it also presumes that you have selected the correct point in time to recover from, so there's no way to inspect that. So this is the core change of why Rubrik. It's 6 years ago that we completely revolutionized the backup market and the way it was done, with the first modern hyperconverged backup software and backup storage solution, and everything that's now table stakes in the industry, such as HTML5, API first, scale out, instantly archive data to cloud, instantly mount and access your data from your backup platform. But what's really interesting is that what was actually considered a negative against Rubrik only a year ago is now the biggest benefit when it comes to our security posture. So in order to provide the level of security and quality of backups to our customers, we cannot separate the backup software and the backup storage. It has to be a closed system where we control the platform and the data end to end. You have a native logical air gap built in. That means from any compromised server in your environment, there isn't a way to mount or access that backup data. This is also combined with a natively immutable file system that was built from scratch. This isn't general purpose storage with immutability layered on. It's not a switch. It's something natively built in to give you the highest level of security. So when you wrap these two things together, It provides a resilient solution for protecting your backups from compromised machines on the network. And a major attack is now a recoverable event from the first copy, and it also gives you the fastest recovery speed. The only thing you have to consider and to protect on the network is the default posture of Rubrik, the logins and the rights of those logins, all of which we'll answer on the next slide. But what we've covered so far is the highlights of the fundamental security components that makes Rubrik stand out. But let's dive a bit deeper. The best way to think about Rubrik for protecting data is the idea of a bunker in a box, or a series of boxes together in a cluster. The OS is a hardened and secure build of Linux with all unnecessary services stripped out. Rubrik is also continuously managing the patching of both the operating system and the backup software. There's no additional shell access, so there's no way you can access the underlying operating system. We then have the immutable file system. And also on top of that, there are no third-party applications. We don't allow marketplaces because all you're doing is increasing your risk and attack vector. So the only software running on Rubrik is Rubrik. Of course, we have built-in end-to-end encryption for both in-flight and at rest. You plug in your own KMS, mitigate the spoofing and the ability to read data streams on network or from stolen drives. The only thing left we have to do is protect the logins, and we do that with a couple of different methods. The first one is we integrate into your MFA for AD users and groups, and then we have role-based access control for least privilege. Anything SAML 2.0 will work. We ourselves use Okta, but we also have a lot of customers that use Azure AD. Really, the key idea here is that we're the last line of defense. It cannot be a username and password anymore. You have to have an extra authentication factor. And so this is encouraged on every single install for every AD user and group. Now, an interesting point is that during an attack, Active Directory is a high-value target. So if your directory services are down, how are you going to log in a backup and recover everything else? For that, everyone has a local user account, but it's likely a local user account with just a username and password. And that's an access point that attackers are looking to leverage. So for that, Rubrik secures local accounts with built-in TOTP, or time-based one-time passcode or password. And what this simply means is that you have built-in MFA for a local account where you can scan a QR code on your smartphone, and you have multiple accounts for redundancy. So this applies to anything for connecting over SSH, and it allows you to secure local accounts so you have a break glass account that you can use for recovery. This is what you're going to use in the event of an attack when you need to recover everything else in the environment. The final step taken is retention lock, and with Rubrik, it's a support-driven partnership. You create a support ticket, and then we require you to fill out a form telling us who are the people in your organization that we must verbally contact in order to make a change. So once it's enabled, even a Rubrik backup admin can negatively impact your backups or remove your ability to recover. So they can't remove the replication, the archiving, they can't reassign an SLA. You can't zero out the retention and shorten it to a single day. The key point here is that it still allows you to do your job, though. I can still take backups on a default policy of daily backups for 5 days and then bump them up. I just can't make that one-time negative change to zero it out and expire backup copies. And then another failsafe is where backup systems historically have trouble securing, and that's system time. If I change the time server or poison the time source and I make it 30 years in the future, all subsequent locks and protections, they just go out the window. Because now a backup system believes that it's 2051 and will start expiring backups. At Rubrik, we use what's called a monotonic clock. And this, rather than using the current time to expire snapshots, it means we measure the passage of time. So it doesn't matter what time is given to the system, we're not going to arbitrarily expire the backups. So when we wrap it all together, between the logical air gap, the native immutability, the encryption, the secure logins with TOTP, the MFA retention lock, and the NTP protection, when you get all those things together, you provide secure backups that can be recovered when you need them. So I just want to highlight that we're still on only problem number 1, which is access controls and security of the data itself. We haven't even gotten to problem 2 or 3. So let's move on to problem number 2. You've been attacked. How do you know what to recover? And this is where we're helping customers strengthen their security posture. We have built-in encryption detection integrated into that bunker in a box as part of your nightly backup cycle. So with encryption detection, it starts looking for anomalies. And anomalies in the backup are a good starting point because this is likely a sign of encryption that a large amount of change is happening. But anomalies on their own aren't really that useful. And the reason they're not useful is because all anomaly means is that a larger than normal amount of data is changed. And often it becomes a false positive. Because these happen on an hourly, daily, or weekly basis, if all you do is anomaly detection, all you get is false positives. And in operations, it turns into noise, it's turned off, it's ignored. But at Rubrik, we take an anomaly and then we automatically scan it and compare against the last backup. But we're looking at file creations, deletions, modifications, attributes, the entropy of the new file created. So we're looking inside that file and looking at its randomization. And we're detecting the actual encrypted files. It's not something that's signature based, so it's not vulnerable to missing a 0-day malware attack. This is something we pick up because we're not looking for the signature, we're looking for the actual encryption attack. What this means is that it removes the false positives, and therefore we cannot miss the one thing that any attack does, which is encrypt data. We then give you detection and an automated assessment of the blast radius. So it's these 500 servers or these 10,000 files. You're not spending multiple days trying to figure out the blast radius. That's what our system will tell you. And this detection is typically done within 15 minutes, or even a couple minutes for an individual backup. So we reduce the start time to recovery. Another key thing is that it cannot be incumbent on the backup team to respond to a security incident at 3 a.m. So we take this filtered alert and we plug it into your SIM or SOAR tooling. And we have pre-built integrations with Cortex XOR, IBM QRadar, Splunk, and ServiceNow. And because Rubrik is an API-first product, we can plug it into something with pre-built examples. And then we can alert your SOC and security team, create an incident, and then respond as a business. Then one of the final pieces we layer on is recovery automation. So you can surgically remediate and recover only the impacted data. For NAS, this makes recovery very simple because we're not recovering an operating system. We're just recovering files. So we give you the last point in time before they're encrypted, point, click, go, and we have the files back in place. The other idea here is that if you have 10 million files and only 10,000 are encrypted, the encrypted detection makes this process much, much faster. So Rubrik can tell you what was encrypted, then you can simply put it back in place. But recovery for virtual machines is a little bit more nuanced because now we're recovering an operating system and we don't want to reintroduce malware or potentially a backdoor into your environment. So it's not as clean cut as a recovery, but we can certainly help you speed that up. Because first, what we can do is we can mount the virtual machines instantly from Rubrik. So you can test the recovery in a bubble, you can verify the virtual machines before you agree as a business to proceed further with the recovery. And because of Rubrik's modern scale-out architecture, this operation is expedited. But one key feature on recovery is that once you've done those mounts and verified the point in time that you want to recover, the next great capability from Rubrik is that we can perform an in-place recovery of those VMs. And this is really critical because if you mount all the virtual machines from Rubrik and then verify the point in time and say, hey, I'm just going to recover all these to production, but now I need to do a storage migration or a storage vMotion. But really what you're saying is that in the most stressful time in the history of the IT department, we're also now going to do a storage migration project of all those critical workloads. We certainly don't recommend that. Use the live mount operations for testing, and then you can validate which point in time you need to recover from. So once you've verified the point in time and agreed upon what point you're going to recover to, spin the live mounts down and then perform the recover in place. Rubrik will shut down all the production virtual machines that you've selected to recover and then roll back the changes by a reverse change block tracking mechanism, and then we'll simply power them back on. And this gives you a great combination of minimizing your recovery time and maximizing your performance because you're immediately up and running on your production storage. But then also you're not kicking off a storage migration project as part of the recovery. And this is how we're helping customers reduce the recovery time objective and the business impact, making sure that it's quicker to recover from backup than it is to pay the ransom. So we've covered point number 1 and point number 2, but we still have point number 3. And this, for me, is really the elephant in the room because even if you've recovered, you still have to remember the exfiltration. So you might be able to recover, but you're still faced with the prospect of having to pay a ransom because now they're threatening to release your data and you don't know what they have. Of course, it's fair to say that there's no way a data protection platform can tell you what data has left the building. But if an attacker is in your environment and siphoning off data, you need to get a handle on what was potentially exfiltrated. Where Rubrik can help is we can tell you exactly what files were encrypted. So you know now what the bare minimum to presume was exfiltrated. Because if they could encrypt it, they could read it. If they could read it, we have to presume that it's gone and it's exfiltrated. So the next thing we're helping customers do is get a handle on what was encrypted in the data. And for that, we have built-in sensitive data discovery, whereby as part of your backup cycle, we're leveraging that spare compute that you have on your Rubrik cluster. You can pick pre-built policies. We have 20 plus out of the box for PCI, GDPR, HIPAA, etc. But you can also put in your own custom pattern or regex analyzers on here. And so what we're doing is we're churning through that backup data, and we'll tell you what sensitive data hits that we've found across everything that's protected. And there's no dedicated team or learning curve for this. You install it, point, click, and go. It's not a new piece of software that you must deploy or run against production. And what we're doing is we're combining this with the view of the encrypted files to give you the risk posture so you can know what was likely exfiltrated. And this allows you as a business to try to make a decision as to whether or not to be concerned about the threat of double extortion. Now, of course, sensitive data discovery is a challenge that all organizations have. So this definitely has use cases outside of the scope of a ransomware attack. And yes, we have customers using it specifically for those use cases. And what's great about it is that it's running on backups. So you can ask the questions that you would normally be afraid to in production because it's not impacting production I/O. It just runs as a secondary task. And this really opens up a world of possibilities because backup is the one thing that touches everything in your environment. So that's why Zero Trust Data Management with Rubrik. The game has definitely changed with the threats out there, and organizations are relying upon IT to provide solutions to protect digital assets. The most important thing is to be able to recover from a ransomware attack. It's not just about protecting the backups. So how do you provide immutability? How do you detect an actual encryption attack and remove the false positives and anomalies? Or how do you automate the recovery? And additionally, how can you get a handle on what content was potentially exfiltrated? Thank you to everyone who joined the webinar. I'm going to hand it back to Scott and my coworker Yop to handle the QA portion of the webinar.
All right, great. Thank you, Jeff. Great presentation. Yop, are you ready for some questions?
Yes, absolutely, Scott.
Outstanding. So first one, what's the most challenging part when recovering from ransomware?
Well, I think Jeff touched on a couple of points there, but from my own experience, the most challenging part is not only detecting what has been affected, but also being able to determine what kind of data it is. Is it sensitive data? Which categories does it fall under? Which departments? Just to get an idea of the entire scope of a ransomware attack. That is something that I find the most challenging, and it's also the thing that you don't want to deal with in the moment that everything is on fire and you have to report to multiple departments at once, and then trying to figure that out is the most challenging part I found.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of along those lines, not wanting to do everything when everything's on fire. What are you seeing in terms of recovery tests? What do you recommend as far as how often people test their recovery or their in their plans, and how often are you seeing customers realistically do it?
So it varies from customer to customer, and also depends on the kind of workload that they have. But
Sure.
what we offer with Rubrik is, because we have this API first infrastructure, API first design, we can automate all these tasks, and we have integrated it into our product in the form of app flows. we have specific API endpoints that can be used to validate if an image is recoverable. And then lastly, we also have something called the backup validation framework, and it allows you to generate a configuration. For example, you have a database server, a web server, an application server, and a domain controller. You deploy all these. You recover all those servers in a private VLAN. You validate that everything spins up. You run your application tests to validate that the response time is good, that you get the results that you want, and that way you can very quickly validate that and also do it in an automated fashion. So you don't have the typical restore test where you manually have to click to an interface to do it. It can be completely automated, and you can either get an alert when the recovery doesn't go well, or on success you can automatically send out an email like, we tested this, your critical workload is still protected, and we've ran these tests against it. So the possibilities are there. How often it happens, it depends, as always.
Right. The classic consulting answer. It depends.
Exactly.
Yep.
My years of consulting shine too.
Hey, we got a couple of questions, one from Sean and one from Gijo about immutability and air gaps. Or I'm sorry, not
Yep.
Gijo, Zach. And I'll read Zach's questions. He says, I've heard a lot about the importance of using immutable backup. Is immutable backup really an air gap backup? I just want to get a clear understanding between those two things. It seems like a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question indeed. So an air gap is different from immutable, because just air gapping something, pulling a network cable out of your PC will air gap it from the rest of the world, mostly anyway. So, but you can still change the files on your computer when it's unplugged from the internet. So that's not immutable. The immutable part of Rubrik comes into our custom file system, and that doesn't allow us to rewrite any data. So we can write once. We can take differencing snapshots similar to what is available in VMware. But it can never be changed. So I hope that that answers your question.
Yep. Okay. Super. This next one is from Matt. He says, I've read about ransomware threats where the criminal deleted the backups before contacting the company for the ransom, knowing they'd be more likely to pay if there are no usable backups. That's his nightmare scenario. Matt, I can assure you that's a lot of people's nightmare scenario. What safeguards do you have in place to prevent this type of attack?
So one of the things we have in place is our backups are managed on an SOA level. So assuming that an attacker would get full access to the Rubrik system, then it's not possible for them to expire any backups immediately. They can change an SOA. They can set it to 0 if they have full control. So that's the nightmare scenario. They have full control. But even then, it takes by default 24 hours before anything is expired. So then your backups are still there. If you want to take it one step further and you want to ensure that it's absolutely impossible, even if the attacker has full keys to the kingdom, can do whatever they want on your system, and they've completely shut you out, then we also offer an additional layer of security, and that is managed SOA policies. And when that happens, then all SOA policies are managed through Rubrik, and the only way an SOA can be changed or which would cause backups to be expired is by contacting Rubrik support. And an attacker would have to be very smart about it to get through that.
Oh yeah, that's good. Okay. Matt is asking, what are your options for air gapping the backup data?
So air gapping the backup data, what we can do is we can replicate all backups to any other Rubrik cluster. So what we can do in the sense of air gapping is to have a Rubrik cluster for replication that is not connected to the rest of the network, and only during scheduled replication windows it will open up one-way traffic in which traffic can be replicated into that cluster and then automatically close that window again. That's how we can air gap the backups.
Okay. All right. Super. Let's see. Got a question from David. Can you give an example or two of some recent events that could have been avoided by using your solution? And feel free to talk about, not even anything in the news, but just sort of anonymized situations that you're aware of, or whatever there. But that's an interesting question.
For recent events, I think any case where a company is forced to pay the ransom because it's quicker to recover by paying the ransom rather than recovering from their backup solution, especially when tape is involved. That is something where Rubrik truly shines, because we have had cases where I'm aware of cases where companies paid the ransom, but the ransomware recovery using the tools that were provided. So that was actually a positive thing, that they actually got the tools from their attackers. That's not always the case. But even when using the tools provided by the attackers, which were very buggy and didn't always work, the recovery was slower than if they would use the Rubrik solution. So that is a scenario where you wouldn't have to pay, and even if you pay, it would be quicker to recover from Rubrik.
Okay, super. Don has a question. In our business, we deal with HIPAA and FERPA laws with our data. What can you tell her about Rubrik and accreditation and things like that?
About specific accreditations, I would have to get back to that, because I don't know all the accreditations. But what we have in place, if you use the Rubrik Polaris platform, we have a product called Sonar, and what Sonar allows you to do is data classification, and it can identify when medical records, credit card numbers, all different kinds of personal information. It can detect where it is within your data, and also it can determine what kind of permissions are assigned there. So that helps with the data classification part of things. And for the accreditation, I will get back to you. I think I'll get your contact details from Scott afterwards.
Yep, we'll pass that along.
Excellent. Thank you very
super.
much.
Yep, sure. Matt has kind of a philosophical question here. What's your stance on password expiration policies? And his concern is that he feels they encourage the creation of unsafe passwords. And so he's wondering, with the combined use of MFA and password manager, is expiration needed? Is that something that you have a stance on?
I agree with the stance that continuously changing passwords just for the sake of changing them is not really secure. I mean, if your password gets compromised on day one after you changed it, then an attacker would have 89 days to use your password, and in most cases they don't need 89 days to get what they want or to destroy what they want, depending on what they're trying to achieve. So I think using secondary sources of authentication, so MFA is a great one. provides more security than even changing your password every day. Within Rubrik, what we often see is that that Active Directory is used. So the password policies, they are enforced to whatever is specified to Active Directory. And MFA is advised, and if MFA is not enabled on your Rubrik cluster, you will get a lot of prompts to enable it.
Okay. All right. Great. A question from Gijo about how do you know that if that a file that's infected is not included in the backup?
Well, the infected files, they will be included in the backup, as long as it's part of what is backed up on your system. Infected files will also be backed up, and they will be part of the backup forever, as it is part of the immutable part of Rubrik.
Right.
So that is there is no way that we can exclude files. We can mark them as infected, but it stops there.
Okay. Gotcha. Let's see.
Very good questions, by the way.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions coming in. Yeah. One from Mark: is the restore of encrypted files handled in Radar? And he asks, is it now integrated in? And then the question kind of breaks off, so I'm not sure if he's mentioning another product line. But anything you can say about encrypted files restoration?
Yep, absolutely. So what we offer with Radar is there's one-click recovery available that gives you the option to either restore in place or restore in a different folder, so you can sort through the data yourself. So yes, that's available. If you want to do it on a more limited scope, the possibility is also there to selectively restore whatever has the highest priority. But what Radar provides is it gives you a full overview of everything that has been encrypted, and based on that, you can act based on what is most critical and what is needed to get up and running again.
Okay, fantastic. Question came in from Deborah. How do you balance recovery speed and availability?
That's a good question. I'm not sure where to go. So the recovery speed. But I'll give a global answer, and if Deborah has additional questions based on that, I'll go deeper. So the recovery speed is based on the workload of your Rubrik cluster. If there are currently a lot of live mount, so images directly mounted off your Rubrik storage, then a recovery will be slower. If there's a lot of backup jobs happening, recovery will also be affected by that. What we can do to balance it out, if you're in a critical scenario where recovery has top priority, you can pass all backups by passing it on an SLA level or for all SLAs, and that would increase the backup speed. For further balancing, scoping your Rubrik clusters to your workload to be able to support the recovery speed, what you need is what will help you out there.
Okay. All right, super. Well, it looks like we've finally gotten through the queue of questions here. There was great participation from the audience. Lots of
indeed,
tremendous questions. And just as a last one for you, Jaap, if somebody wants to get started with Rubrik or find out more, what do you recommend?
Well, we have the links listed here. If you would like to get started and get your hands on the product, you can always reach out to one of the sales teams. And if you're interested in taking a look at some documentation that we have available, we have all Rubrik documentation available either on Rubrik.com or the API kind of documentation, which is my world, is all available on build.rubrik.com. So if you're into scripting automation, then that's the place to be.
Super. Well, Jaap, thanks so much for all your time here in the Q&A and for all those great answers. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Happy to be here, Scott.
And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the prize drawing for the $300 Amazon gift card. And the winner of the Amazon gift card is Mark Lewandowski from Maryland. So congratulations to Mark. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for putting together a really informative presentation and for, again, for all of the ops insights in the Q&A. And I'd also like to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank you all for attending and for all your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.